Good evening, and so we meet again to discuss the macabre. Last week on the discussion board I asked you, what is our fascination with death? Because we are a culture, as cultures have been for literally thousands of years, who are very concerned with what lies beyond. We fear death, and we fear death again because it is the unknown. We want to know what happens to us. And in some ways, we try to answer that question by examining what has happened to those who went before us. But nevertheless, our culture is obsessed with those types of things. Now, humans might have always feared death, certainly since the earliest writing, Gilgamesh, the earliest piece of literature we have. Humans have certainly feared death because that was his big thing. His quest was to find immortality. Now, not all cultures treated their dead in the way that we treat our dead. And I talked about this in the PowerPoint on zombies when I discussed Çatalhöyük and Jericho and how they buried their dead in the walls or in the floors of their houses. Modern pre-literate societies have done that as well for a couple of reasons. One, simply so they can keep their loved ones near, and two, because you want to propitiate the dead and you want to treat them correctly, because if you don't, the dead will come back to harm or harass the living. And even though we are scientifically advanced, this still perpetuates itself in our culture. It's interesting because I drive by a cemetery every time I go to school, and there's a fence around it. And I can't figure it out because the fence has open spaces, gates, not gated gates, but open gates ever so often. And there is a space underneath the chain link by about that much. It's not keeping anything in or out. So why put a fence around a cemetery? Why do we separate our dead and put them out in a necropolis? But that's another aside. We're going to talk about vampires, the other undead, and how they are like zombies, and how they are different from zombies. The lore of the vampire is most certainly prehistorical. Humans learned to write in about 3,500 BCE, but there is no doubt in most anthropologists and sociologists' minds that the lore of the vampire existed before then. Now, not in the manner that we think of vampires, but some form of either cannibalistic or blood-sucking aspects of the undead. Now, the vampire is one of the most enduring myths that is existent in modern times. And again, we are going to examine its history and its continuing hold over the living. So let's get going. Vampires, the other undead. If modern America has a fascination with zombies, we have even more of a fascination with vampires. Now, vampires and zombies do share like characteristics. They both have died. They have both resurrected, both are feared, and both have undergone some pretty drastic changes during their time of death. But the zombie as we know it is a relative newcomer when compared to the vampire. Where did the myth of vampirism start? Now, with the myth of the zombie, we have a little bit more of a clear-cut idea because of the Sumerian myth. The vampire is shrouded in mystery, even in its origins. Some think that the first vampire was the Egyptian goddess Sekhmet, because she did have quite a taste for blood. But it wasn't in the same sense that we think about vampires sucking blood. So she might be a precursor, but she is not a vampire. Some of you might be familiar with the name Lilith, but probably few of you know that she has her roots in ancient Samaria, and she probably has more of a claim to being the first vampire than does Sekhmet. Lilith was known for causing death to infants. Her history, again, is much longer than I will go into here, but later in the Kabbalah and Jewish lore, she became one of the first succubus. And a succubus doesn't suck blood, but steals men's semen while they sleep in order to impregnate herself with demon children. Lilith's looks have undergone some metamorphosis over the centuries, from the Sumerian screech owl goddess to the portrayal of her as a beautiful woman with red hair. Another contender for the first known vampire, or at least a precursor of vampires, is Lamia from Greece. Lamia was a beautiful queen of Libya who was either seduced or raped by Zeus, and unfortunately Hera misplaced her anger and killed Lamia's children. As a result, Lamia went insane and began to eat the children of other people. It is said that she was unable to close her eyes and block out the sight of her children being devoured. And so Zeus gave her the gift of being able to remove her eyes. She does share some similarities with Lilith in that they are both child killers. But, and they are also represented as having red hair. Red-headed people have been evil ever since Egypt, when the red-headed Set killed his brother Osiris. Having been born with red hair, I do have to add a disclaimer that red-headed people aren't really evil, even though they have been looked upon as being rather strange ever since the days of the Egyptians, and have given rise to many, many myths, and that's many myths or legends about people with red hair. And of course, we're all familiar with the old adage, the red-haired stepchild who is always treated poorly or badly just because sure he had red hair. There are other precursors for the modern day vampire, but this is again a survey course, and man, I'm running out of time here to present these things. So that's it for the origins of vampires. But in the next part, we're going to see how they evolved over the centuries.